So I promised at day 28 myself that I would put together a video of something that was a little less related with, the physical withdrawals and the other types of withdrawals when it comes to quitting things. And I would maybe address something that I've seen in my own time quitting things, but also that other people may have issues with as well. And that is dealing with the people who are going to hate on you for quitting video games. And you could really swap out video games for anything, because I think when we're quitting stuff, there's always going to be a hater element in what you're doing. And I've talked about this prior, where you have the type of hater who's like, oh, they take it personally. As in, oh, you're quitting this, you don't like it, you think I'm a piece of shit then because I still do it. And those types of people, I find it tends to be more about the drugs than about things like video games. I think most people are sort of indifferent to the video game quitting, but there are some people who, and you see them on the internet and YouTube comment sections or on Twitter, who have so much of their identity tied up in video gaming that when you say that you're going to quit, that they take it personally, and find ways to sort of denigrate that positive action or that positive step that you're going for. So I'm going to go through some of the basic examples that I have. It shouldn't be too long a video, but if any of these apply to you in your life, you might find some use with regarding it. Number one is the "why are you quitting? They're just video games" hater. This one is easy to respond to. If you're quitting video games, it's because they're not just video games to you. You are taking responsibility for a behavior that you've identified as unhealthy, and when people say that, it shows that they don't have knowledge of the way that video games have negatively impacted your life, or that the habitual use of have negatively impacted your life. So the hater that asks you why you're quitting and tries to make it seem like what you're quitting is just a small thing, these people are just ignorant of your personal situation, and likelihood is they're not close friends. If they are close friends, then it shows that they're not as close as you thought, because you would have most likely spoken to this about them at some point, and they should know that you have had a kind of a concern about how much video gaming you have done. Unless you're the kind of person who doesn't share information with your friends. If that's you, then my suggestion is you should start looking for better friends. Because if you don't have people that you can share that kind of stuff with, then you're going to struggle in life in general. And if you're a young person, developing that now, priceless. I mean, it really is priceless. Number two, the "you'll be backers." Maybe you will be back. Maybe one day you will decide, screw it, I'm going to pick up Ghost of Tsushima and I'm going to play it. And I'm going to like it. And then you find yourself back in the cycle again 6 months later. That's not bad. I mean, it's bad in a general sense. But as long as you're looking to continue to improve and try to quit again, or maybe you have good reasons for picking up video games again, and you're able to moderate it, then great. But people who say that you'll be back when they're hating on your quitting are people that are projecting their inability to commit to anything on you. And largely this is jealousy about you taking a stand in your life. I've dealt with this again when dealing with quitting marijuana. I remember a friend who got upset that I was. And one of the things he said was, oh, you'll just pick it up again, you always do. And yeah, he was right. I did. A couple of years later, I ended up doing that. But at the time, what he was doing was projecting his lack of discipline and how unhappy that made him on me. So again, not a great friend, not someone I really cared to hang out with all that much afterwards. And when he said these types of things, it was sort of a red flag that said, yeah, okay, it's time to jump out of this. Number three is it's just fantasy level, fantasy league kind of stuff. Video gaming is nothing more serious than adult jocks playing fantasy league with the NFL or college ball or whatever. I would argue back with that and say that's a fine comparison to make. It's actually pretty true. Fantasy League is essentially Dungeons and Dragons for sports nerds. But that's bad in excess. And if you're abusing that, then it doesn't matter whether it's just Fantasy League stuff because it's more attached to the real world through sports or video gaming. If you're abusing either of those two things, then that's bad because that's taking up too much of your time and you are clearly feeling some kind of discomfort or unease because you're not applying your time in a way that you want. An example of this is the unfuckable husband who gets into his hobby too much. That's been me before with Warhammer 40k, and I would actually say if any of you have seen the 40-Year-Old Virgin, Paul Rudd's character in the 40-Year-Old Virgin, I think it's the 40-Year-Old Virgin, or is it? No, it's Knocked Up. It's Knocked Up. In that movie, Paul Rudd's character is an unhappy husband, and he sneaks off to play fantasy ball with his mates. That's an unhealthy level of involvement in something when you're keeping it from your wife and treating it essentially as if it's an affair. And if in moderation it's fine, just like video games, but in excess it's not fine, and it usually leads to more problems. And then number 4, when it comes to the haters, is the validation circle that exists within the gaming industry. I'm not going to go and name names here. There are people out there who have been more than loud about the fact that video games is a benign industry and that it has no effect on anybody at all, and that to criticize it and criticize people's overuse of it is, tantamount to saying that video games cause school shootings, which is, not really true. But at the same time, that's a wild accusation. Saying that habitual video gaming is damaging to someone is a true statement, and depending on the type of person, can be differing levels of damaging to them. The other thing to remember with the media around video gaming is that they are a parasitic organization, and a parasitic organization needs to have something at its core that exists in order for those things to exist around it. And if video gaming were to dry up, those people would be out of a job. Game reviewers, game critics, game developers, the YouTube channels that have millions of subscribers of people who are just watching someone else play video games, their income depends on the circulation of video gaming in the popular culture. And again, in moderation, no problem. But for people who are addicted to it, you should stay away from the media that helps validate the type of behavior that you don't want to exhibit, the type of behavior that you want to do. So that means staying away from your favorite game reviewers, staying away from game critics or indie companies that are developing games that you wanted to follow. Just turn all that shit off. And if you're on social media, as I've said before many times, get off social media. It's garbage. It's hot garbage. The only real reason anyone should be on social media is if, like me, you live in a different country and you want to catch up with friends and family back home. But you can do that with messenger apps and still not have to have a Facebook account or be involved on Twitter or Instagram. And my girl and I argue about this all the time, but I think social media is a poison. I think it's poisoned the way that we communicate with one another. And I hope, here's my optimism showing, I hope that young people will eventually see through it and begin a counterculture that throws social media out the window. And companies like Facebook and TikTok and Twitter and all the rest will eventually break down from lack of users or lack of engagement when people start to go back outside and develop physical, real relationships with people, like in-person relationships, because that's where you get the benefit from having friends. And because you can't have 100,000 friends in real life, you're going to develop much closer and intimate relationships, which then is going to give you the benefit of those relationships, which you don't get from the social media interaction. So with the media and the parasitic organizations that surround the core industry of gaming, you can guarantee that they're mostly full of shit when it comes to supporting the use of gaming, because it's in their best interests to keep the business going. Now, there's a few exceptions to this, and I'm going to go ahead and name one of them, and that's Jason Schreier, because he's one of the few journalists, and I would even say that maybe, what's his name, Jim Sterling, he's another one. I don't agree with everything he says. When he gets political, I usually turn his videos off, But between the two of them and a few other journalists who follow in their footsteps or who have set examples, investigative journalism around video gaming is something that should still continue to happen, and in a lot of ways has done good in that community, particularly where it's exposed the abuses of employees within gaming companies, where the culture is just, toxic. Yeah, so those are the four main types of haters that I've observed when it comes to quitting video games. You may have others that you've noticed. One of the things that I'd like to talk about at my last points about this is that gaming is part of popular culture, and popular culture, generally we tend to think of it as things that are safe. And I would argue the point that celebrating and promoting an activity which causes people to be less social in person and causes people to become addicted to cycles of dopamine, which we know happens in video games. They are in large part designed to create repeating engagement. That these are not developing good citizens necessarily, and that all the research that comes out and shows that it's improving people's reflexes, or that it is actually somewhat social and that it's helping to develop friendships or whatever. I mean, yeah, I have a best friend that I met through World of Warcraft, but we didn't develop our best friendship through the game. We met up in person and then became best friends after that. So the people that try to spin that shit always look behind the curtain. Who's holding that puppet? Who's dancing that person around and telling them to say those things? More often than not, it's going to be someone with an interest in keeping the video gaming industry going. And just because it's part of popular culture doesn't mean that it's safe. Pornography is part of mainstream culture now, and we have an entire generation, or I shouldn't say an entire generation, we have an entire segment of an entire generation, starting with millennials, who are compulsive addicts to pornography, who whole subdivisions of porn have been created for, who are just addicted. They just sit there and pull it all day, and that's it. How do I know this? I was on the outskirts of those communities for maybe a couple of weeks. I saw it, I won't go into detail because it's pretty graphic, but it's the kind of stuff that encourages the addict behavior, and it does it overtly. It's not doing it subtly. It's not sort of built into the scenes, and it's not trying to fire the dopamine. This is, you are an addict, you're a slave, be a little piggy. And the engagement that those videos get is quite shocking, because the type of people that are getting, and they're submitting like real slaves to their dopamine hits that are being provided by this company that has no interest in the mental well-being of these people, and is essentially hijacking their reproductive system so that they can get more engagement and therefore more money from sponsors and ad revenue. So yeah, the same goes for video gamers, I believe. In a similar way, games are trying to find more and more ways to give them more and more engagement. And we're even seeing with EA, they've put advertisements into their games so that you can be advertised to in the middle of something that you've paid for already. And the argument is, of course, like, well, you go to a sports game, you go to an in-person game, let's say you go to watch an NFL game, and there's advertisement everywhere there. But you can choose to not partake in that advertisement. Whereas in a game, when games are advertising to you, sometimes you can't necessarily just turn that off. And it's subtle how they sort of weave it in. But it's, again, it's ways of them giving no fucks about your mental well-being or what's going on, and them only caring about pushing their profit lines. So just because gaming is popular culture and it's considered safe, doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't many risks inherent in the compulsive use of it. And because it's being developed to be so addictive and so encouraging engagement, like the porn industry, it's developing a generation of people who are sitting and rotting in their chairs while they accomplish nothing. And not to be a fearmonger or anything, but this is going to be damaging for those people in the future. And really, it's going to be damaging for our culture in the future, because we're not developing strong leaders. We're not developing good critical thinkers. We're developing consumers. And while that's great for the market, for the country as a whole, and for the culture of the country as a whole, that's bad. That's really bad. consumers who can't tell the difference, or who have very little willpower left to resist, shitty advertising. We don't want those people to be large segments of our population, because then we're going to have politicians who say things like, "I'll get you faster internet so you can sit in your basement for longer," or "I'll make sure you get we make sure that we get games don't go above $60," and they're gonna avoid real world problems in favor of sort of keeping everybody comfortable. And we don't make a good country by making everybody comfortable. We make a good country by, again, this is my opinion, but we make a good country by having people question what they're being told, and by asking hard questions and having difficult conversations so that they can develop new ways of looking at the world. I guess the good example of that is, you don't get fit or strong by sitting at home watching videos about people getting fit and strong. You get fit and strong by going out and putting yourself on the iron and doing the work. And that's what I think we should be having people, young people in particular, doing more of. Anyway, I guess it ended up being dealing with the haters and then understanding why the video game industry doesn't give a shit about you. So that's the end of that video. As I said before, we're at the end of week 4, and it's been real. I got fuck all people watching these videos, so that's fine. But they have really helped me put my thoughts that I've been able to get on paper out into the open and hear them. And I've learned a lot from being able to do this. I've become more aware of these things, and I've become more aware of a lot of this connection stuff myself. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to do this. Anyway, that's all I have for you. Ka kite.